Members have served. Thank you for the service.
Thank you all. All right, so most of my work I do storytelling, and this is just such a natural thing. When she said to me, what about the Marine Corps birthday? Because we're 250 years old this year. And in my 20-year career, I did a 3-year stint as a recruiter. And one of the things they stressed to us in recruiter school was the ability to speak out of your pocket, as they would call it, at any given time. Because it sounded cliche when we were in training, but there were school events that I would go to present awards, and a speaker wouldn't be there. And the principal would come to me and say, okay, can you fill in for about 10 minutes? And you get a free commercial. And that's why at the recruiter school, they stress the ability to just get up and run your mouth for a couple minutes and get some free advertising to help. So I could have done this without any notes, but I would have been all over the place too. So I tried to organize it sequentially as far as Marine Corps history from the founding of the country and all. So I'm going to read a lot to you, but at the same time, I'm probably going to tell you stories, and I have some fun things to share. So now, for 250 years, the United States Marine Corps has served honorably. The history of the Corps is the history of the nation, from service on the high seas with the Continental Navy to the modern day. And U.S. Marines have distinguished themselves in every clime and place, as our song will tell you. Founded on November 10, 1775 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Marines have fought from the shores of Tripoli to the valleys of Afghanistan, always the readiest when the nation is least ready, America's 911 force, as we like to say. And U.S. Marines have participated in all wars of the United States. This success on the battlefields and oceans of the world have garnered high honors for the Corps, and also a few nicknames, and I'll share those as we go along through this report. Some of the trivia surrounding our lore adds a level of mystique the other services envy. Perhaps because of this, they call us the few and the proud. Ours is the only dress uniform of the United States military that sports the colors of our national flag. The dress blue with red piping and a white belt and the white cover. Gives you all three colors. Now, the buttons on our dress blues and our service green uniforms are the same pattern of our brothers in the Continental Marines. And I'll be happy to pass this from one side to the other. You can have a look at this. It is it's an eagle embracing an anchor with a rope on it, with 13 stars above it. And it's the same pattern that the Continental Marines wore. And to this day, it's still the same button we wear on our dress uniform and on our service uniform. And it's the oldest serving piece of military equipment in the United States military, from all of that heritage. And we get cocky about it from time to time, but that's how it is there. So with the revolution coming, the Second Continental Congress on November 10th authorized the raising of 2 battalions of Marines for service with the Continental Navy. They would be broken into ships detachments, reporting to the various ships of the Navy, acting as their security, landing parties, and manning guns below deck, and acting as snipers in the riggings when the ships were engaged in broadsides, sides close combat for boarding and repelling. From the start, the Marines would wear uniforms similar to those of the British Royal Marines. Our Continental Marines wore a forest green coat with white buff lapels on it, and the buttons then would be connected into the buttonholes along the coat. But when the United States Marines are formed, we kind of pay homage to the British, because the Royal Marines, we take a lot of our traditions and a lot of our customs from them. We know the British are the redcoats. Well, they're Marines too, wear red. And fun extra fact for that, the bands of the Royal Marines wear a blue coat with the same cut and pattern as the red coat regular Marines wear. And at the start for the United States Marines, when we formed our first band, we put the band in red coats as an opposite to that. And to this day, the Commandant's Own, the Marine Drum and Bugle Corps, and the President's Own, the Marine Band, still wear that scarlet tunic. For our actual colors are scarlet and gold. And I had an opportunity when I was posted with the Quantico Band, Commando 4-2, which was a Royal Marine unit, that's also a band, came to visit us and do some training. And we got to play together, we got to climb ropes and jump around and beat each other up. We had a really good Marine kind of time together. And when we played together, we wore our dress blues, and you know how they look, and their band's dress blues, except for the buttons, and without their pith helmet on, they look like us, as far as that goes. So there's this camaraderie amongst the United States and the Royal Marines of Great Britain. And now, as I said, from riggings and ships and all, so we wear uniforms similar to the British. Significantly, Marines would sport a leather stock about the neck to protect against sword blows while boarding or engaged in rappelling boarders. And I'll pass this one around too. So this is what gives us the nickname leathernecks. Because we would wear this on our neck, and the idea was it would protect against a sword blow. So there you are for that. Now the Army did wear them occasionally, but the Marines made it part of the uniform. And to this day, the way that the collar on the dress blues is set up with the high neck, that's paying homage to having worn the leather neck on the uniform that way. So it gives us that nickname leathernecks from that. And that is a hallmark of why Marines stand like we do, you know, from the get-go, where we're ramrod stiff and we're always up, because the men couldn't help it wearing that on their neck. It kept their heads up, the way it feels.
Was there a movie, Leathernecks?
Flying Leathernecks
Was that?
with John Wayne. Oh yeah, John Wayne was in it, and it was about Marine pilots in World War II. I could have done just a thing on movies about Marines, probably. And how many times John Wayne played one. But yeah, Flying Leathernecks was the name of that movie, right?
So that's supposed to prevent the bayonet hitting you?
Not a bayonet, because a bayonet would stab in, but a sword. If somebody comes up and
Oh,
slash
okay,
you.
got it, okay, got it.
And it's, you know, it would have to be a seriously sharp blade or a really precise direct slice to come in there. Most times, if you're with your musket and you were deflecting that, it might graze, and if it scratches the leather, well, you'll get issued a new one.
Yeah,
You know, but you'd rather get issued a new one, you know, than
having no neck.
have your head go in the ocean when you're repelling borders. All right, the men for these Continental Marines were recruited at Tunn's Tavern in Philadelphia. And we always make a joke about how the Marine Corps was formed in a bar, and then we'll segue into saying all good ideas are started in bars. Look at the Marine Corps, it was formed in a bar. Tunn Tavern in Philadelphia was torn down sometime in the late 1800s, but there's an effort now to build a replica of it near to the site, and the actual site is under one of the pilings for the Schuylkill Expressway in Philadelphia. But where the new one is close, and there's a wayside that says here stood Tunn Tavern, founding domicile of the Marines. And Samuel Nichols was commissioned captain of the Continental Marines that were formed up there. And this made him our first commandant. And that became a question in boot camp on inspections. Like, because we actually had Marine Corps history classes in boot camp. It wasn't all just running around, you know, yelling about, I hate being at home, I want to be a Marine, all the other stuff we would have to sing and chant when we're running. We actually got legitimate classes in Marine Corps history. So if we were standing a personnel inspection, and we have to go to an inspection arms with our M16s, the inspector would take that, he might say, so when was the Marine Corps formed? And you had to spit out, sir, 10 November 1775, okay, who's the first commandant? And you had to know these kinds of things. So our recruiters would prep us on that kind of stuff. Now you can bet on my recruiter tour, all my people went fully versed. I said, I will not be embarrassed by you failing that test. The heritage is just too interesting for that. So the first action of these Continental Marines was landing at New Providence, Bahamas in April of 1775. So this is before Washington had his army fully fleshed out. 1776. So the army had formed in June of 75. We were formed in November. But the following April, we go into action before the army does. And that's just one of those things. That's why it makes that whole point about being first to fight and all of that, because here we are. And what they did, there was a British fort on Nassau, and we invested it, captured the British, paroled them, took all the cannons and all the gunpowder, loaded it on our Continental Navy ships, and brought it back up for Washington and said, here, use this in your army. In a nutshell, that's what happened out of that. The Barbary Pirates War follows the Revolution. And if you don't know about the Barbary Pirates in the Mediterranean, and as I tell you this, you'll remember the lyrics of the first verse of the Marines hymn, and you'll come to see. July 11, 1798 is the date of the formation of the United States Marines. So we have two birthdays. But we all prefer to use the Continental Marines' birthday of 10 November 75 instead of July 11, 98 as our start date. The Marine Band uses that as their start date because they were founded with Thomas Jefferson. Yes?
Which one is the official?
The official United States Marine birthday is July 11th, but like the Army, it was Continental Army in June of 75, it was Continental Marines, and the Navy for that matter was Continental Marines, and they're formed in October 75. So they should be considered older than us. But for whatever reason, now it's Department of War, but what came out years ago for all military service bands, if we were to play a medley of all the service songs, we were to play them in what we call DoD birth order. And it was Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and now we have to augment that whole medley with the Space Force also. So in the band leader school, we like using acronyms. You know, we come up with acronyms all the time, and I'll share some of those. So to remember that order for testing, if you couldn't just rattle it off, I came up with AMNAF-KGUD. And everybody in the band class, say AMNAF-KGUD. Now, there's your order of Army, Marine, Navy, Air Force, NAF, right? Navy, Air Force, and then KGUD was Coast Guard. So if you could say AMNAF-KGUD, you could get that question right. But I don't understand why the Navy's not considered, and I'm not really complaining about it, as that goes. But here we are, being formed as United States Marines, doing the same duties for the Navy as we did in the Revolution, but now also coming ashore with the United States diplomats as a security precaution. And this goes on all through the 18th century as well as the 19th century into the 20th century, when there's a Navy flotilla that visits some exotic port where we have a consulate of some kind. If there's no U.S. government official that's on the ship that's being taken there, the captain of the flotilla will come in to represent the country. He'll deliver a diplomatic packet of some sort, possibly mail and things like that. And then he'll ask the embassy or consulate, whatever it is, how they're being treated by the locals. And it comes up quite often how the Americans might be disrespected by the locals. And he'll say very well. And usually the captain of the Marine detachment is with the captain of that ship, and he'll just kind of look at it. And this happens quite a bit. Now in the dark of night, once they've gone back to the ship, there'll be a party of Marines that will come ashore. And they'll figure out, they'll know whoever this person was who was harassing the Americans. And then they'll break up his house. Like a brute squad. So if you wonder what the Marines are going to be doing in the coming Civil War, that's going to play into that too. Now, with all of this protection of diplomats and all, we get into some trouble because during the Jefferson administration, pirates along the Barbary coast of North Africa harassed commercial ships of all the European seagoing nations, as well as ours that are merchant ships. They exact tribute, or they steal their cargo, or they outright eliminate the ships and crews if they burn them to the hull in the water. And if they have people on board they can enslave or impress into service, then they'll make them pirates reluctantly along the way. And this is getting in the way of Jefferson's, zeal to make the country prosperous through overseas trade. And in the President's Oath, you do make a statement about protecting American citizens and property. This is where Jefferson takes it seriously, that he orders naval vessels to also ply the Mediterranean near our commerce ships in order to stop the pirates. And who's aboard those ships? A lot of Marines. So this is where this whole thing starts to happen. So as the ships and crews are captured, one of the prominent criminal leaders was double-crossed by his brother, and he's deposed to Alexandria, Egypt. And an agreement was reached, so a landing party of U.S. Marines under First Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon combined with a mercenary force of 300 and freed this deposed prince, whose name is Hammett. And from freeing him, they marched west from Alexandria to Tripoli. And they removed his brother from power and installed Prince Hammett then as the potentate, and we reached a treaty with him to lay off our commerce ships because he had been under protection of these Marines. And in gratitude, Prince Hammett awarded his Mameluke-hilted sword to Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon. Now, what's a Mameluke sword? I never got one because I've never been a commissioned officer. But if you've seen the commercial for the Marines with the sword and all the fancy flipping around and everything, it's got this curved ivory hilt to it, and with a brass inlay that looks almost like a diamond. That's the officer's sword for U.S. Marines. It's also the sword of British field marshals. So there's this funky equivalency thing that Marine officers carry the same sword as British field marshals. And I'll get into the NCO sword in a little bit, but keep that in mind. It's ceremonial. All Marine officers carry a replica of that original sword to commemorate that act from this potentate. And of course then, because they marched into Tripoli, this is Shores of Tripoli in the Marines' hymn. Now 1812, when war comes with England again, U.S. Marines participate in naval engagements and land battles, defending Washington City as well as New Orleans, and in Maryland at the Battle of Bladensburg. Now the British Royal Marines, I already mentioned our camaraderie and how we mirror each other's uniforms and traditions and what have you. The British Royal Marines are said to have ignored the Commandant of the Marines' house in Washington when they burned everything else, including the White House. They left the Commandant's house alone at the Marine barracks out of professional admiration for their brother Marines.
Was the White House originally red?
No, it's always been white. It didn't really, and it was always referred to officially as the Executive Mansion. Up until the end of the 19th century, the official stationery would say from the Executive Mansion at the top. It's not until pretty much the turn of the century that it became from the White House. But it's always been white. When it was rebuilt after, President Madison was in office when that was burned, and when Dolly Madison came back, she had everything whitewashed again to restore it back to that glorious white. Now it was torn, the White House was torn down, pretty much gutted from the inside. I think it was either Eisenhower or Truman in between there. That it was like a shell left to it, and the whole thing was gutted from the inside and rebuilt.
What is Trump doing now?
He tore down a portion of the East Wing, and he's having a ballroom built onto that, because for now, when there's not a military, but a diplomatic dinner party or something like that, they rent these massive circus-looking tents and put everything in these tents, and they have the plastic walls on, like you see at weddings and things like that. And Trump even offered during the Obama administration to put his own money into building one, because he came to one of those parties and said, this is unworthy of the President of the United States when you have foreigners come in like this. So he wanted it on par with these other leaders. But back in 1812, British come. They burn the Executive Mansion. They're wrecking things that the government owns, and they come across where the Marines are. Oh, that's their commandant. We'll leave it, and they turn around and walk away from it and leave it intact. So we thank them for that. Now, throughout the War of 1812, the conduct of the Marines helped solidify the combat role expected of us, and it leads to the Marine Act of 1834, which clearly defines what the missions will be of this fledgling group of Marines. And to call it a Marine Corps is a misnomer at that point, because in echelons of size of military organizations, until the 20th century, the smallest group mustered up is called a company, and that would be 100 men in a company. And then when you combine 10 companies, you form a regiment. So then with these echelons of size, there's an equivalent rank that's supposed to be the one that commands all that. So a captain commands a company, and a colonel commands a regiment. And if you put 3 regiments together, you create a brigade, and that a brigadier general commands that. So there's this whole echelon of sizes of things. And when we were formed up, we had 2 battalions. We didn't even have a full brigade yet of Marines, so we can't really call it the Marine Corps. And there's unofficial language that calls it that from the period, but then on all the official documents, it just says the Marines of the Navy, or things along those lines is how they refer to it. Yeah.
What is Corps short for?
It's not. It's C-O-R-P-S, the French word. Now, a corps. Now, a brigade is the three regiments, right? 3 brigades, because we do things by threes now. If you put 3 brigades together, one brigade is 3,000 men. So 3 brigades is 9,000 men, and that's a division. Now you take 3 divisions, 9 times 3 is 27, that's 27,000, and that becomes, 3 divisions become a corps. So company, 10 companies make a regiment, 3 regiments make a brigade, 3 brigades make a division, 3 divisions make a corps. And that's how many thousands of men. And from that, in the Civil War period then, at least 3 corps combined together make what was called a field army. So we name all our armies in the Civil War after the rivers nearby where they operate. Like the Army of the Potomac, the Army of the Tennessee, and we say the to designate us from that river. Confederates go into a whole different thing. It's confusing, even to them, how they, and their sizes are a little smaller than the federal side. But for this exercise, regimental strength is about what we come to at the start of the Civil War. And we don't really have the Marines acting as a regiment because we put them in detachments aboard ships. And you won't have more than 50 Marines aboard the biggest of the screw-powered frigates in the Civil War. And that's coming. Now, one of these duties aboard ship, and it's a fun picture, it didn't print the way I wanted it to, but Marines would be up in the riggings in the tall ships. So, some people say they're in the crow's nest, and crow's nest would be really, really tough even for two to be in there because they're up in the riggings when we pull alongside for boarding, or a ship pulls alongside and we have to repel them. We've got Marines with their leathernecks duking it out, you know, on the gangplanks. But we had Marines up in the rigging who were up there sniping on the other side. So the officers were not comfortable with that because they didn't want to get shot, right? Because you can't tell from the top. And at this period, they're still wearing the bucket shako, really, really tall. The tall hats even we wear in the Civil War, they refer to it as a shako. The cadets at West Point still wear a tall one called a shako. You see old school marching bands that wear the shako, has an eagle on the front, has a visor, but it looks like a bucket on their head. And during that period, they were huge, massive things. And the officers are wearing these too, and they have a gold rope on it. But you can't see that when you're in the rigging and there's smoke from gunfire and everything else. So they were taking pieces of rope and stitching them to the top of their shakos. And it carried over because that was the way, you know, you're in, oh, wait, that's one of ours. And you go after somebody else who didn't have the two pieces of rope, and they put them in a perpendicular cross kind of pattern. And I have my Civil War Marine Detachment captain's hat to show you what that looks like. Now to this day, and it's referred to as the quatrefoil. Okay? To this day, Marine officers wear that on their green cover they wear and the white cover they wear in their dress blues. Enlisted, we don't wear that. So they get that fancy sword, and they get the quatrefoil on top of their cover.
That's captain?
Right. That's my, yeah, I was in reenacting days before I worked I was doing my stuff as Grant, I had a Marine detachment. And we would go out on the battlefield at reenactments and be Marines.
You were a captain?
For the Marine detachment, because I had enough guys in my reenactor group. And that's how it works for how you get ranked in reenacted. I had 15 to 20, and doing this in San Diego where there are 3 Marine bands, I had a whole bunch of my Marine buddies who came out with us. So the reenactor rebels were afraid to come at us because they said, they're really Marines, we don't want to go after them. But because I had enough guys within the reenactor community, I was told, well, your rank could be captain because you have X amount of troops. So that kept a lot of other people off my back because some of the other guys who were playing officer, they want to pull rank all the time and tell us how we have to do stuff. So I was comparable to a lot of them where they couldn't pull any, hey, you're a Marine, got to go do this, and I'll talk to our captain. Oh. So it worked out, you know, saved us a little bit. But that quatrefoil is still worn today on the uniforms, and that starts in the era of 1812, and it becomes something added to the Marine officer uniforms. Now, you'll see it now when you see a commercial for Marines. You know,
Few to the proud.
you'll see, yeah, because you'll see like if you're some sporting event and they have a color guard, if there's an officer, you'll see the quatrefoil on top of his cover. Now you know why. You can look. I know why you have that. All right. Well, this leads us to the Seminole Wars in the 1830s. U.S. Marines served in the Second Seminole War between 1835 and 1842, manning forts, patrolling the interior of Florida, and escorting Indian removal parties. It was that period. They were rounding them up and moving them off their land. Led by Commandant Archibald Henderson, the Marines faced new hardships, gaining renown, though, for their versatility and perseverance in these new environments. The victories in battles such as Hatchee-Lusby and Wahoo Swamp demonstrated the Marines' effectiveness in the challenging Florida terrain. There's a legend about Archibald Henderson. He's called the grand old man of the Corps because he served longer than anybody's ever known to have served, well over 40 years. And he was our commandant for most of that time. And when he went off to fight the Seminole Wars, he gutted the barracks. There was maybe a bugler and a couple others left behind, but he took almost everybody. And the Secretary of the Navy came to see him didn't realize he went with the Marines that went to Florida, and there was a sign on his door that said, "Gone to fight the Indians." In his own hand, he tacked it up on the door when he left. And Secretary said, "That's the fighting spirit we need from everybody," because even the Commandant went along with all of them. And now, here we are there. We come to 1846 and the war with Mexico. A two-theater conflict, if you will. There was fighting in California. There was fighting from Veracruz on the east coast of Mexico all the way into Mexico City. The whole thing started because President Polk basically antagonized the Mexicans. In fact, Grant himself writes in his memoirs that he felt the Civil War was punishment on the United States for making war in a weaker nation in the war with Mexico because of what was done. When Polk took office, he said he had 3 or 4 goals, and among them was to gain California as U.S. territory, to settle with the British about the Oregon territory, and to fix the land dispute in Texas. Because there are 2 rivers. We all know the Rio Grande as the border of Texas to Mexico. 60 miles north of that is the Nueces River. They run parallel to the Gulf. And as I said the other night, I said the Gulf of Controversy. And somebody didn't really understand what I meant by that, but got it later on. But here you are. There's a dispute now. The Mexicans say Texas ends at the Nueces. The Texans say Texas ends at the Rio Grande. So President Polk puts an occupation force in that disputed zone and goads Santa Anna's men to make an attack. And when they do, he goes to Congress and he asks Congress for a declaration of war, saying how we were in sovereign American territory and these Mexican soldiers shot at our men. Now, I'm not too fond of Polk in a lot of different ways, but the respect I can give him is that he accomplished all the goals he said. And what he also said was if he reached all those goals, he wouldn't run for a second term. So he's probably the only president that kept that promise that he left office after that. But in the conflict itself, the main fight was in Mexico. But early on in the war, we were fighting in what's known as Mexican California. And in 1846, it was July 22nd, Marines from the sloop of war Cayenne landed in San Diego, marched into the town square, and raised the U.S. colors for the first time. And that today is what's called Old Town State Park within the city of San Diego. And it's about a mile from the front gate of the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego. It's about 3 or 4 miles from the flight line of the San Diego airport. And I had the privilege of being a history docent there and doing living history stuff as a Mexican War Marine for a few years. And the flagpole in town is set up where the ship's mast was planted with U.S. colors. And these Marines marched in and ran the flag up. And a woman from the Machado Hotel, who was really just upset about all this, she came running out with a big knife. And all the Marines go to fix bayonets to protect themselves. So she ran past them and cut the rope so the U.S. flag would drop. She didn't care about them. She just didn't want the flag up there. Not out of anger about the flag, whose flag it was, but the fact that it was up because she said that was going to bring Santa Anna to California, and they didn't like him. So they wanted him out, because the Marines grabbed her and pulled her aside, put that flag back up, and she's like, no, you don't know what I'm doing. You know, she's speaking Spanish and all that, so there was this confusion about everything, but the first time the flag goes up in California is July, and there's a big rock there, we always call it the chicken croquette, because of how it looks, and it has a plaque on it that says how the Marines came in to do their business there. Now, by that December, an expedition of U.S. Army troops led by General Kearney comes in. And if you've never been to San Diego, and you talk to people there, they call him Kearney. And every good Jersey man will, no, it's Kearney. Because there's several mesas within San Diego. There's Mirror Mesa, there's Claremont Mesa, and there's Kearney Mesa that they all refer to as Kearney Mesa. And it just makes you cringe when you know the difference of what it's supposed to be. Mesa College is on that mesa, and I was co-director of the college band, but we had a community band called the Kearney Mesa Concert Band. And I would say it that way when I was introducing the band. I'd get looks from everybody, and I'd say, that's how you're supposed to pronounce it. My wife's from Bayonne. And when she moved out, after we got married, she came out, I met her after I was out of the Corps, but she came out and lived there. She hears all these people going Kearney. She goes, what's with Kearney?
Yeah.
You know, with that accent the Hudson County girl had. It was too funny. It's like, you fixed them. So so she would go off. But here we are, General Kearney, for whom it's all named, marched from Arizona territory through the desert into Southern California. And he came up on this Indian village. He wasn't sure what they were all about, but he staged this attack. There were Californios, the troops defending California from us, who were amongst the Indians, and they went at him. And his men were coming down a hill on mules. They had 32 mules they were riding. They weren't even on horses. And everything went bad for Kearney's force, that they were broken up. Several of the men, and the Californios fought with lances. These 10-foot poles with about a foot-long blade on them, and they had lassos. So their whole technique was to go along and lasso the mule, knock the soldier off, and then go at him with the lance. And we didn't have repeaters, we had musketoons. Those men, they're called dragoons. They were the forerunners of our cavalry. So they had these short barrel muskets that they were trying to load and carry on and everything else. The remnants of the party under Kearney holed up on this one small hill, and now it's referred to as Mule Hill because of how the men had to survive on the mule meat until they were rescued. There was a Lieutenant Beale who was with Kearney. He was a Navy lieutenant, and there were a few Indian scouts that were with him as well. Beale was famous for starting the Camel Corps. There was an experiment to run camels around and instead of horses for the cavalry that would be in the desert. So that was Beale's claim to fame. But Beale and one of the Indians volunteered to come through the lines of the Californians. So they tie their shoes around their necks and they low crawl through the brush. It's pretty much desert. There's brambles, there's cactus. Oh goodness, I forgot what they call the cactus out there. Boy, I've been away that long. But there's the purple cactus that's on top of the big leaf. Has a special name. But everything's prickly. And they're all over the ground. So these guys are going through that in their stocking feet. And in the midst of all that, their shoes fell off. They lost them. And they managed to get through though. And they went the 60 miles from Mule Hill, which is near the town of Escondido, where the Wild Animal Park is now, if you ever go out there. And they walked through all of that to San Diego. And they got into Old Town, what's called Old Town now, about the 5th. And there were Marines there. And they told them what was going on. So the skipper from the Marine detachment got permission from the captain of the ship, and they took a Marine contingent out to rescue Kearney and his others that were out on the hill. So the Marines saved the day for the Army at that point. Kearney did not want to give them any props for it either. He said basically, oh, we had it under control by the time all of you showed up. He didn't want to give the Marines.
So why would you take your shoes off?
They thought it would help them creep along.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I want to walk around in all that stocky
Curious.
feet. Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. But it makes it more dramatic too, because they came in, they were torn up, their feet, their socks, everything, and they were scratched everywhere, half crazed from the whole thing. And they come walking out of the darkness, and everybody in Old Town was having a good time. Like, what happened to you guys? Where'd you come from? So that's the fighting in San Diego, and the Marines went up and rescued him and brought him back down. In January, there was a fight outside of Los Angeles. Commodore Stockton, another Jersey boy, he marched Marines and Army off of the ships that were tied up at Los Angeles and marched in, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo settles the score in California. And that's one of Polk's little objectives, but it was Marines who were right in the middle of all of that. And of course then, in the main part of the war, where General Scott landed his expeditionary army of the United States, of which Lieutenant Grant and Colonel Lee and countless other men who become known in the Civil War are all part of our national army, march in fighting their way to Mexico City. And the Marines are with them. And there's a huge fight at Chapultepec Castle. Chapultepec Castle is the national building where the government functions. And it was a proper castle the way it all looked. And there was a portion of it that was protected well with gunfire and musket crossfire, and the Marines were the ones who went in to take that. Because that becomes the halls of Montezuma in the Marines' hand. And for their effort, in that battle, you know what an NCO is? A non-commissioned officer. That would be a corporal or a sergeant, okay? In that battle, there was a factor for the casualty rate that 90% of the NCOs were killed or wounded. And in homage to that, it was decided that only corporals and sergeants of the U.S. Marines would wear a red stripe on their trousers, and the officers wear it too, because they have to have everything. But here we are, the non-commissioned officers are the first, because if you're a private or now a private first class, you won't wear that red stripe until you make corporal. And we refer to it as the NCO stripe officially, but we all call it the blood stripe. Are your Marines, were they corporals at all, or on the way to be one? Because there's a ritual with that. And when you get promoted, you get your chevrons pinned on your arm. Everybody, your new rank or higher, has the opportunity to ensure it stays on by pinning it with their fist. So when you make corporal, every NCO has an opportunity to make sure you keep your blood stripe pinned to your leg. And you come out of that, your legs are as blue as your trousers are. But it's what Marines do. It's rite of passage, so you can ask your Marines about that if they ever went through it. All right, now, I mentioned about the blood stripe here. So moving on, in 1860, now, following the Mexican War and General Scott taking over Mexico City, Marines were assigned to guard the National Palace at Chapultepec Castle. And of course, then that solidifies our stature of honorable service and respect to a vanquished foe by preserving their building. And then, of course, then the halls of Montezuma. So we come to the Civil War, and now we're at regimental strength. So we have we rate our commandant to be the rank of colonel, because we have 17,058 enlisted men and 63 officers. So we just went over a full regiment for our size. And this is hard to staff. There's minimal desertions from the enlisted ranks when the war starts. However, 20 officers of those 63 Marine officers go south. And at the end of the war, the commandant, our first brigadier general commandant, because by the end of the war we actually reached brigade size. So we have a one-star commandant, Jacob Zeeland. He orders that any of the officers that went south will never be permitted back in the Marine Corps, because in his mind they defiled their oath to the Constitution by fighting for the South. And what about the enlisted men? He says, well, they don't know better. They're just enlisted men. He allows them to come back, but none of the officers. So keep that in mind. I'm going to give you a little bit about something from each year of the war. However, something very significant, October of 1859. Marines were in action that leads to war, with the capture of John Brown at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The federal arsenal there was seized by this anti-slavery zealot named John Brown, who had planned to create a slave insurrection. He had pikes, like those Californians, and he gave all the slaves that he was freeing the pikes. And his men had muskets, and the slaves were saying, well, give us muskets, so you want us to help you fight. No, they couldn't be trusted, according to him. So he has some slaves with him, but he has his little cadre, and they hole up in the firehouse at Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is a crossroads where the Cumberland and Potomac rivers meet, and a lot of railroads are coming in, even at that time, the B&O Railroad being the most prominent of them. And the townsmen, the local constables and all, they have telegraph because of the railroad. They send a message down the line to Washington, and they're asking the United States government for help. Specifically from the War Department, because they say their constables can barely keep these people in this firehouse where they have it kind of ringed up, and they're worried what's going to happen. So send troops, help us out. So the War Department realizes that they're going to have to find some troops, and they're looking for the senior officers present. And it just so happens there's a colonel on furlough who lives at Arlington House, who recently completed an assignment in Texas with the 2nd U.S. Cavalry. And his name is Robert E. Lee. United States Army. He is asked to take command of a force that can go to Harper's Ferry and subdue Brown and his insurgents. And they tell him, give us a day, we're mustering up troops. But they come to understand quickly that the only body of troops that's ready to go is a cadre of Marines from the barracks on 8th and I Streets. There aren't enough soldiers in town to make any worthwhile attempt. But as it is, 86 Marines are put together to go out and do this. Now, it works out when the War Department is talking to the Department of the Navy and the Commandant of the Marines that there's a young lieutenant fresh off duty at the 2nd U.S., and he has come to the War Department to seek his next assignment. He thought he would wear his dress uniform. So this young lieutenant with spurs and a sword and a sash and peacock feathers in his hat comes in there all gussied up to look for a job, basically. And his name is Jeb Stuart, United States Cavalry. And he's told, go to Lee's house and tell him that the Marines are gonna be ready to go and meet them at the station, the B&O train station, and head out to Harper's Ferry. That's the order that's given. The senior Marine who's tagged to lead this ad hoc battalion is a young first lieutenant named Israel Green. He's the senior line officer present, but the paymaster of the Marines is a Major William Russell, and he's told then to go along and supervise this young lieutenant, because he's not quite sure. And it's a joke among, it's a joke, but it's a little bit like, it's a respectful joke too. We like to say that you gotta be careful of those overzealous first lieutenants. You know, because they wanna prove themselves. They come out of officer training, they wanna show, particularly they wanna show the sergeant that is basically telling them what to do, that I can handle this, you know. So he wants to jump on it and go, but they're not quite sure that they trust him. But he loads up 86 Marines with their combat load of muskets, ammunition, and rations. And this would be your cartridge box that your 40 rounds would be put in. The 40 rounds are basically the size of your finger. It's a piece of paper with the gunpowder wrapped inside it. We refer to that as a paper lady. All right. And then the other belt has a scabbard for the bayonet. That would be on the end of your musket too. So all these Marines are wearing these cross belts. They're all loaded up with ammunition. And Lieutenant Green even finagles a 3-inch howitzer. And the Marines are dragging it down the street, and they look at the train like, well, there's no flat car, where are they gonna put it? So they have to leave it. He just wasn't thinking it through. But at 3:30 p.m., Green and the Marines are on the train and heading out to Harper's Ferry. Turns out they didn't wait for Colonel Lee. Overzealous lieutenant, right? I love it though, I love it. He just said, well, off we go. So Stewart and Lee, by the time they get down to the train station, all they see is the last car of the train and the smoke of it having puffed away. Now they're looking at what we're gonna do. There's another locomotive on another track across from the main track 1. It's facing the opposite direction. They go talk to the crew. Hey, could you help us? We have to catch that train. You got Marines. Yeah, we saw them leave. Yeah, well, how are we gonna do that? Can you take us? Sure, we can take you. Great. Go turn your train around and we'll go. And they say, no, if you want to go, we have to go now this way because you won't catch them any if we take the time. The turntable is 5 or 6 miles the other way. There's no Y track even right there to turn. Now the Y track, the train would go up on it, pull in, it would back out, and then come back the other way facing the shape like a Y. And they said, there's no time for that at all. And Lee is wearing a suit. Long black frock coat, tall hat, fluffy cravat, and you got Stewart in his dress uniform. They climb up in the cab with the engine crew. The engineer runs the throttle, the fireman throws the wood in, and there's a man on the back of the tender called the wood chuck that throws the wood forward to be thrown into the firebox. So they have to stay out of their way to operate this train. And they're pushing them, like, can you go any faster? Can you go any faster? We gotta catch him. And the engine crew tells them, if we go any faster, we're liable to jump the track. Because running backward, the tender, the wooden water car, is lighter than the locomotive, even though it's pretty heavy itself. But if you push it too fast, centrifugal force will lift the flange wheel. Like there's a flange that holds the wheel against the rail. If you go too fast, it can lift out. And if it lifts out, off the track it goes. And I have my own experience with that when I worked at Strasburg Railroad, where we had to run 3 separate trips to pick up 3 cars each of a freight and stay out of the way of the passenger train coming. And I was the conductor for the freight op, and I'm on the locomotive, and I'm like, can we go any faster? And the engine crew said, no, we'll jump the track. And I'm like, oh, that's just what this. So like, it's real. So it was an impediment to Lee getting out there. But by the time they do, they find when they get off the train and they get to the firehouse, Marines are already encircled, bayonets are out, their officers standing by. They have a sergeant major with them as well. And Stewart talks to the Marines, and he gives them some instruction. He goes up to the door of the firehouse. He knocks on the door, there's a little window, like a speakeasy kind of thing, and it's brown behind the window. He says, what do you want? Well, we'd like you to come out. There's Marines here who are very welcoming, so please come meet them. We're not coming out for no one. And he slams the little window shut. Stewart took off his big fancy hat and did this gracious bow, and that was the signal for the Marines. 5 or 6 of them had a log, and they came up and busted the firehouse doors open. And in their doing that, the first man in was a corporal. He got shot by one of Brown's men. And for the Marine Corps' sake, we refer to him as the first casualty of Civil War. Now, he's the first one down. Second Marine in was the lieutenant, and he had that fancy Mameluke sword. And he's wearing his kepi with his quadrifoil on, okay? And he goes in, and he sees John Brown, who's on the ground, who's trying to protect himself, because Green's coming at him with that Mameluke sword to come down on him. And he hits his arm. The blade of the sword shatters. It's a ceremonial sword. It's not even meant to be used that way. But the blade shatters, and Green's standing there. The next Marine, the third Marine in, is actually not a sergeant major, but he's Drum Major John Roach of the United States Marine Band. And he is the senior NCO that was on that trip, because they didn't have a proper sergeant major. So they said, hey, Roach, can you go? You know the job. Yeah, sure, I'll go along. He's the third Marine in. He grabs John Brown as he's trying to get up, picks him up by stacking swivels, is what we always say in the Marine Corps. I'll get him by the stacking swivels and throw him. And he body slams him, knocks the wind out of him. And an 8 or 9 Marines dogpile ground. That's how they ground him up to bring him in. So pretty intense little drama. Yes, sir.
Before we, can we go back a little bit?
Yeah.
How did they get the train to turn around, or how did they get on?
Oh, they didn't.
How did they catch up to the Marines?
They ran backwards, and they were like an hour behind by the time they got into Harper's Ferry. So the Marines, if it takes 2 hours, the Marines left at 3:30. They get to Harper's Ferry at 5:30, and because that locomotive can only go like 20 miles an hour to not risk, they lose time. So they get out there an hour later, and in that hour that it took them to catch up and stop, the Marines had already gotten off the train and set up a perimeter around the firehouse.
So they just ran after them?
No, they had a locomotive of their own, chasing the 3-car train the Marines were on.
That's what I mean,
Yeah.
but I thought that locomotive was facing around.
It was.
So how did they turn that around?
They didn't. They ran it backwards the whole way,
Oh.
which makes it even crazier. But that's why it takes them the extra time. Because going backwards, you can only go, well, railroads call it a safe speed. And a safe speed is not a particular number. It's defined as the fastest speed you can go and still be able to stop a full car length from the obstacle impeding your progress, is how it's defined. So they had to go maybe 15, maybe 20 miles an hour. And you know, most municipal streets, it's a 25 mile an hour. So think about, that would be too fast to even go that if you're going the speed limit in a town. And the Marines on their train, they were going 30 or 40 miles an hour because the lieutenant was like, let's go! And off they went. So the whole affair. And Lee really couldn't fault them for that, you know. He said he's a young lieutenant, he's going to do those things. And now what he says about it, when it's all over, General Lee, Colonel Lee at the time wrote about it. He said, I must also ask to express my entire commendation of the conduct of the detachment of Marines, who were at all times ready and prompt in the execution of any duty. So he was extremely happy with them. I have been at reenactment events where there's been a General Lee, and I've been in my band leader uniform, because my band will do things, and I'll test them. Because if I'm John Roach, if I'm being John Roach, I'll say, General Lee, I remember you at Harper's Ferry. And I'll look at him, like, do you know that? And I've met 2 who knew what I was talking about. And I was like, okay, I can work with this guy, he knows the deal. And one of them even went, do you know what he did? Do you know what Drum Major Roach did? And he went in, he was telling it for all and they were like, no, I didn't know any of that. So, good. You know, somebody understood that. For a footnote to all of that, Lieutenant Green, the young officer, he was one of those 20 that went south. Yeah. So he was not allowed back. He was not readmitted into the Marines following the war. Now, after the attack on Fort Sumter, 2 years later, the Navy realized they had to expand their fleet, which meant they had to also expand the Marines to fill them out. Compared to the Army, the Marines had a disadvantage, though, in recruiting. There was no enlistment bounty to entice a recruit. With the Army, they were getting bonuses and everything else because they were mostly funded by the states. But the regular Army, any unit that has U.S. before it, tells you that's federal government. That's regular Army, regular Navy, and of course the Marines. We didn't have volunteer Marines, so we didn't have all those advantages that way. The enlistment contracts were not for the short period like the Army volunteers were too. You signed up for the Marines. It was almost an open-ended thing because you were signing up for duty aboard a ship. And you know you're going to go out on a deployment. You know your ship is going to go. And you're going to be gone for a year, possibly 2 years before you're going to come back in. or you could be out longer, depending what goes on. So, a lot of people didn't want to do that. So the Marines had a harder time filling the ranks, but they still managed through all of that. The first land action of the war for the Marines anyway, because the first land battle was at Philippine, which is now in West Virginia. But the first battle in Eastern Virginia is at Manassas in July of '61, and a battalion of 350 Marines came out from the capital as their own force. And they weren't trained up. There wasn't a standardized way to train them. So it was touch and go with who didn't have experience and who did, as far as holding the line. And they put up with a lot of galling fire, as reports said. And as they reported, when the Army broke and ran, we held the door to allow them to escape. That's how they put it. And then the Marines themselves collapsed their formation and evacuated the field. This is the only known instance, and it's hard for us to say this, it's the only time that we left the field not in our control. Other people call that a retreat. We don't like to say that word as far as Marines are, because we were always told Marines don't retreat. But that's the only historic instance. In '62, Marines aboard an ironclad named the USS Galena, which is one of those slope ships with the guns sticking out on all the sides, went up the James River with a flotilla, and at Drury's Bluff, ships were taking heavy fire from a Confederate battery that was in this fort. Marine Corporal John Mackey of the USS Galena rallied his comrades to man one of the ship's big Parrott rifles that had been disabled. The crew had disabled a sailor, so he grabbed a bunch of Marines and they went around his gun and carried on. The shore defenses at Drury's Bluff were manned by Confederate Marines. Very small group, but there was a contingent of Confederate Marines throughout the war. And that's about their only claim to fame, was this fight at Drury's Bluff. Now, for Mackey's sake, because of his actions, he is the first Marine to earn the Medal of Honor on May 15, 1862. Not long after the 20 men of Andrews' raid of the Great Locomotive Chase were the first to be awarded the Medal of Honor for their efforts to steal the General and bring it up north from Atlanta to Chattanooga. So all of that happened. They had this new award, and they want to give it out as much as they can. And here's this Marine Corporal Mackey who wins that. In 1863, a 300 Marine landing battalion is formed off the South Carolina coast from the various ships in the blockade fleet, and they raid in on the Carolina coast at a small town called Honey Hill, which is not far from Parris Island, about 10 miles further inland. And it's very near Hilton Head as well. So remember how I told you on those diplomatic missions, the Marines would come ashore and they would wreck a place? That was the experience that these guys had, these 300 who come in, because all of them who had been to sea, they were told, just tell us where to go, we know what to do when we get there, and they caused quite a bit of mayhem for that. Now, along with that action, whoever the generals that were commanding Army troops around there got wind that they had this seasoned battalion of Marines, that they had the flotilla commander cooperate and allow that Marine battalion to get integrated into an Army brigade. So they were fighting on the Carolina coast with the Army. And they come ashore in the cross belts, and you see why it's a cross belt, because it goes on this shoulder. So you have this white belt goes here, and you have this white belt that goes here, and you have your cross belts. This is what the British had. We had these in the Continental Marines, and of course the Army has a similar thing, but it's black and leather, right? But Marines, against that blue coat, they're wearing these cross belts. They come ashore, and the Army commander doesn't like them being white because he said it's too conspicuous. Ashore, the Marines like that because what would happen is sergeants would only wear one. So from the back, when the officers are looking, they could see all the men lined up, and they could see XXXX, and they'd see the slash, and they'd know, okay, that's one squad of Marines, and that's their sergeant, because you may not be able to see the chevrons that far away. But the Army didn't like the white, so the commander of whatever that battalion ordered the Marines to blacken their leather. And of course, they're shocked. They're like, well, it has to be inspection ready all the time. He says the skipper of the ship wants it white, and we stand up, and brass has to be polished, and the whole thing. And the Army commander says, well, you're serving in my battalion, you'll not do that while you're with us. So when the whole operation is over, They go back to their ship detachments, and all the captains of the ships are having birds about it. Why do my Marines look like soldiers? You know, because you got an officer leading those Marines, but the captain of the ship, that's his security force. That's his brute. Those are my Marines, as they'll say. Now, my Marines will not look that way. So, in your non-duty hours, you're scrubbing all that black off of your white belt for the back. The things Marines focus on. The Marines aren't happy unless they're complaining. Keep that in mind. So I told you for that. Yeah. So many of them were told, clean that leather and look like Marines again, which was part of their distinction. Now, I didn't even mention the emblems of the time, because when we first started, we didn't have a distinguished emblem for the Marines. In the Army during the Civil War, they developed the badges that are on the kepis for the various branches. The cavalry has 2 cross sabers that are pins. And the enlisted men wear a brass version, the officers wear an embroidered patch. The artillery is 2 cross cannons. And the infantry is referred to as a hunting horn. It looks like a French horn pretty much. It's not until the Indian Wars in the 1870s that the Army went to 2 cross rifles to represent the infantry. So Marines, being sea-based infantry, adopt that hunting horn as our emblem, but we put, in Old English script, we put an M inside the hunting horn. And enlisted Marines will have a brass badge like that, and officers that have the embroidered one. So that's our emblem until 1868, when this Commandant Zeeland said, I'm tired of being confused for the Army. Because when Marines were coming ashore in all these operations, most of the time nobody really noticed they were wearing the white. They were looking at the cap badge and, oh yeah, it's another group of soldiers. No, we're not, we're Marines. Well, how are we supposed to tell? So the Commandant said, we need to come up with a better representation for that. And he based it on the emblem that the Royal Marines wear. The Royal Marines wear the Eastern Hemisphere with a lion, which represents the British Empire, with a crown on top of it. And that's the emblem of the Royal Marines. So Brigadier General said, well, we serve in the Western Hemisphere. Our national symbol is an eagle, and we'll put an anchor on it to show our connections to the Navy. So the eagle, globe, and anchor becomes our emblem in 1868. And I'll tell you more about this box in a little while. That was my best way to show you what the emblem looks like. And to many of us, it's heresy when we hear somebody refer to it as an EGA. It's like, you can't take the extra second to say eagle, globe, and anchor. You have to go EGA. Well, it's quicker. It disrespects the heritage, you know, so we old school Marines. We get cranky about that. But there's some heritage for you with that. Moving on from the Civil War, because I could talk about that all night, but I'm not going to get anywhere else. Post-Civil War in the 1870s, the Marines were a relatively small force, about 2,000 men, and 75 officers, serving at sea. And key developments, though, is the removal of the leather stock. It was deemed impractical. A lot of Marines complaining during the Civil War coming ashore on these rowboats, splashing in, being in the sand and getting sand up in your neck and everything else. It became a ceremonial thing for guard duty. You wouldn't wear it in the field anymore at that point because they were fighting Confederates who were not trying to slash their necks at that point. So that ended that. And the most action that Marines have in the 1870s is in an expedition to Korea. So we were in Korea 80 years before the war in Korea, doing the nation's work there. So the Spanish-American War comes, and this is truly the first global war that the Marines are involved in. Of course, it begins with the explosion aboard the USS Maine, which had been sent to Havana on a friendship visit. When it exploded in 1898, there were 250 crew members killed, and the casualties that resulted were far greater than those sustained during the rest of the war. Only 90 of the 350 men on board the USS Maine at the time of the explosion survived, and among the casualties, mostly Marines and sailors, of course, but she had a Marine detachment on there. Congress declared Cuba free April 19, 1898, which led to Spain declaring war over that. Marines quickly organized a battalion for deployment to Cuba. 623 enlisted Marines, 23 officers formed in less than a week. We were ready to go. And they embarked aboard USS Panther, arrived in Key West, Florida for training for a few weeks, and then landed at Guantanamo Bay, June 10, 1898. So to this day, we still possess that as a US Navy installation. And it was already then considered a strategic position. Now, the same month, the Army's 5th Corps landed in Cuba, June 22nd, about 12 days later, to capture the town of Santiago. Although successful, the Navy and the Army faced coordination challenges in the campaign. Santiago surrendered on July 12th, following the destruction of the Spanish fleet in the Caribbean Sea. Puerto Rico fell under U.S. control in the war due to, in great part, to the landing parties of Marines who secured the beaches, which allowed the Army then to land and move inward along the way. This isn't the only fighting, though. We were fighting with Spain, who controlled those places in the Caribbean, but they also controlled the Philippines. American forces under Commodore Dewey were ordered to the Philippines with a naval squadron, achieving a decisive victory at the Battle of Manila Bay on May 1st. In this theater, American forces faced minimal resistance from the Spanish fleet, but the Marines' rapid mobilization and effectiveness were crucial, and the conflict underscored the importance of the Marines in future littoral military operations. So we're finding our way. We're finding our role. You know, the Army's always known for land battles, obviously the Navy, but what do the Marines do? We're kind of in the middle. And at every juncture following one of these wars, everybody wants to cut the budget for the armed forces. You know, you spend all that money on it. The Marine Corps, the Civil War, we were spending $1 million a day. We had 1 million men in uniform spending $4 million a day when Robert E. Lee surrendered at the end. And the first message Grant said after Lee surrendered was to the quartermaster, and he said, "Stop spending money." So it's always a traditional kind of thing, and they looked then to cut the smallest service, which has traditionally been the Marines. So the Marines are always struggling to justify their existence. There's always talk that, well, we'll reduce the Marines to the size of a battalion and the Army can absorb them. Then if something comes up, we'll have a battalion ready to go. And the Commandant's always saying, we're going to take away our individual profile if you do that. So they're fighting for justifications to their mission. Always, always, always. And this is no different there. With the Philippines war over, there was an insurrection following the war, and the Marines provided ground forces and underway detachments for operations there that the Army further enhanced. Marines were integral in taking cities and pursuing insurgents on the islands such as Leyte and Panay. Less prominent than the Army's involvement, their actions contribute to the overall effort. Following that, now not many people know this unless you've seen the Charlton Heston movie about it, but the Boxer Rebellion occurs in China in 1900. They called them the Boxers because their symbol was a fist of this insurgent group of Chinese who were rebelling against China opening up to European powers. And European powers all had this legation where they had a compound where they had their various consulates to do business with the Chinese government. But these other people wanted the door shut and they rebelled against that. And the legation wound up being besieged for 55 days. And the Marines there were the primary defense of that and protected everybody there. And what we learned from that is the experience of coalition warfare. Because there were Russians, the English, the French had military forces there. And because of the Marines being ready like they were, these other militaries kind of went under them and said, you tell us what you need us to do. And the Marines got to charge of that. Okay, good. You got artillery, good, you're going to do this. So they made an impression on these other world powers. And this is at a time we're not quite there yet as that. But Marine Corps aviation begins in the early 1900s. And our first aviator, always a test question, First Lieutenant Alfred Austell Cunningham. We always had to say A.A. Cunningham because I don't think the drill instructors could pronounce Austell. And he received his orders for aviation duty May 22nd, 1912 at the Navy Aviation Camp in Annapolis. He earned his wings August 20th the same year and went on with a distinguished career, becoming the first director of Marine Corps Aviation and leading the first Marine Aviation Force in France during World War I. Before World War I, we have what goes on in Central America known as the Banana Wars, because of the Banana Republics. This goes on from the early 1900s through about 1934. And the Marines were conducting interventions in the Caribbean and Central America, protecting U.S. interests, going ashore, wrecking things. Key operations involved fighting guerrilla forces in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua, with Marines doing ground patrols and actually providing air support. So Marine aviation was being integrated into this, flying around being spotters for our Marines on the ground. And amphibious warfare doctrine was being developed as well for what we call the MAGTF, the Marine Air Ground Task Force. We refer to that as MAGTF in big letters for that. And the senior leadership was actually willing to try new things, which was unheard of for so many of these trained officers and these experienced men. The Army had the hardest time adapting to the repeating rifles that were coming out during the Civil War. And Grant was one of the leaders that understood the telegraph and the railroad, and there were other leaders that appreciated that too, but the old school didn't want anything to do with that. So these young officers in the Marines were told by the commandant, keep us relevant. Find new ways to show the country that we shouldn't be disbanded. So they're testing and experimenting a lot along the way. At the start of World War I, there were 462 commissioned officers, 49 warrant officers, and 13,214 enlisted men. And we're the smallest branch at that time. May of 1917, Marines departed for Europe on the USS Henderson, the USS DeKalb, and the USS Hancock. We get there in June. They're from the 5th Marine Regiment. The Army has the Expeditionary 2nd Division, including the Marines, will now grow with the 4th Marine Brigade, the 5th Marine Regiment, and the 6th Marine Regiment, and the 6th Machine Gun Battalion. Here we are in World War I with the technology. The Army had this commanded by one of their 2-star generals, but he had to go to other duties. And the Marine officer who was available was Major General John A. Lejeune. So he was given command of this force of soldiers and then Marines as a division. And he becomes the first Marine to command a division, taking control of them in July of 1918 and remained so through 1919 for about a year. So he's credited with leading a division for the first time. So we've expanded to that point. We have a Marine officer do that. He's also the one who composed the birthday message that gets read every year at all Marine Corps birthday ceremonies. He was our 13th Commandant. So at the ceremony, there'll be a point where somebody will say, ladies and gentlemen, a message from the 13th Commandant. And we have the message, everybody has it on a scroll. So we find some young hero Marine come out in his dress blues, and he comes out and opens that scroll. 13th Commandant, and he reads the message from John A. Lejeune. It's all part of the tradition of the birthday ceremony, but Lejeune's the legend, for a lot of things. We distinguish ourselves in France. The actions at the Battle of Belleau Wood. This is where the Germans, who were perplexed by the highly accurate long-range rifle fire of the Marines. We're trained to hit from the farthest you can go, to this day. When we're trained at boot camp with rifles, we start at the 200-yard line to the target, we go back to the 300, and then we go back to the 500-yard line. Well, none of the other services will teach you to shoot the rifle that accurately from that far a distance. And the theory is, if we don't have to get in close, why should we? If the rifle allows you to hit from that far, we're going to do it. And even with the rifles of that period, we were trained that way. So the Germans are looking like, can't even see them. How are they hitting us from wherever they are? Well, we're trained that way. So we get respect from them about that. And when we get in hand-to-hand combat with them, it's even more so. That they refer to us as the Teufelhunde, the hounds of hell, for how we fight them. So that's where our nickname Devil Dogs comes from. And we all call each other that in a pleasant way. However, there's always, you knew when you were in trouble as a young Marine when you would hear the voice of some sergeant go, hey, Devil Dog. Hey, come here, Devil Dog. You'd hear it, you're like, oh, no, what did I do? And it was kind of a way they'd let you know you did something, but they're still trying to let you know, hey, I know you're a Marine and you made a mistake, but the tone of, come here, Devil Dog, you just knew something was up with that. But it comes from this nickname, the Teufelhunde, that the Germans call us the hounds of hell, out of respect. This Battle of Belleau Wood is one of the bloodiest for Americans to have fought. The 4th and 5th Marines, to this day, wear a red cord on the green uniform with the tie, and also the dress blues. If you are a member of the 4th or 5th Marine regiments, while you're posted to those regiments, you will get to wear this red cord called fourragère. And it was awarded by the French government. And when you leave that, when you transfer out, you can take it with you as a memento, but you don't wear it if you're not assigned to those regiments along the way. It's a little bit of a badge of honor. Now, what comes next? Well, after World War I, we have a little trouble with the US mail. And, along with that too, I don't wanna forget the women in this too, but I always skipped over that. From the action in Bella Wood, 6 of our future leaders of the Corps, 6 of our soon-to-be commandants throughout the next 20, 30 years, all got their experience in World War I in Bella Wood. So they become our commandants and our general leaders in World War II and Korea, making that transition out of that trench warfare into the beach landings and everything else, and the fighting we developed through Korea. Marine aviation also was a part of it. We lost over 30,000 Marines. I'm sorry, we had 30,000 serve and lost a third of that killed or wounded in the fighting. Some of our most famous Medal of Honor recipients, Dan Gelly and Smedley Butler. You ever hear those names? Not around, if you're not around Marines, you won't, but yeah, we wrote the running songs we do. We talk about Butler and Dan Daly. They earned the nation's highest honor in the war with some others. Now, Dan Daly is the most decorated Marine in history. If you ever see his photograph, he looks like the Bulldog, which becomes our mascot. He's got this rock square jaw. And just the look in the picture, like, I don't want to mess with this guy. He's incredible. Over a 30-year career, he saw action in all major Marine campaigns from 1899 through the end of World War I. So he earned his first Medal of Honor during the Boxer Rebellion. He earned his second in Haiti in 1915. He further cemented himself in the Marine Corps lore when, at the Battle of Bella Wood, he got up to charge a German machine gun position and looked back and he yelled, forgive me, but this is the quote, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" to his company to go with him over the line, charging into the Germans. So, devil dog. Right there. You know, so we say that kind of stuff when we're attacking the bar. But, you know, we open the door, come on, you know, in we go. So we have our little tribute to him about that. He was awarded the Navy Cross and the Distinguished Service Medal for his actions in France. Along with those, he already had 2 medals of honor. And incredible man. So in this time too, we start enlisting women, and they're initially called Marinettes, and their whole thing is free a man to fight. So they're given clerical duties, they're given supply duties, handing out uniforms and shoes, because you know women can't do anything, right?
No.
That's the theory in the 1900s.
So we've been told.
You're a good sport about it, right? So we're thinking about in that period, but the Corps we come to accept women as equals by the end of the 20th century, and like all good stories, it starts somewhere. Now in 2016, we had the first female Lance Corporal become the first female Marine to enlist in the infantry. It was unheard of.
2016.
In 2016. My recruiter tour, 95, 96, and 97, I put 69 people in the Marine Corps, and I put 13 women in that group of 69. And every Marine I put in was guaranteed what they wanted. I didn't put anybody in and they got lucky on something else. The majority of the women went active duty, a couple went reserves. And one of them wanted to go in the infantry the worst way. But in the 90s, I couldn't help her out that way. But here we are in 2016. She's in the infantry. Now today, 93% of all our occupational fields have women in them, and 62% of all the billets within, those are statistics that, 93 out of 100% of all the jobs we have, there's women in them. And they're represented there. In 2023, over 13,100 female Marines serve on active duty, and over 5,100 serve in the reserves. So they're a good chunk of our force. And they do everything we do. Boot camp has been integrated now. The physical requirements, that's still something to be worked out. And I know Hicks has stepped in it when he talked about the things he did, because physically, men and women are different. So for the longest time, the women didn't have to do pull-ups. They did what was called a flexed arm hang. And they would get up on the pull-up bar, they'd be helped up, and they would chin over the bar. And as long as their elbows were still bent. So they're hanging like this, they could still be counting the time for it until their arms went straight, and then they'd lose the time. Before I retired in 2004, they did go to women doing pull-ups. And the body mass is the hardest part about it, because of how muscles are made up, that it's tougher on the women to do that. And the run times, they were evaluated on a 1.5-mile run for the longest time. Men have been evaluated on a 3-mile run. You run a 3-mile run 18 minutes or less, you're going to get 100 points on your fitness score. And you could run it up to 28 minutes before you fail. So you had to make it between 28 and 18 minutes. The women could run 1.5 miles in 9 minutes or less. And they were all about lung capacity. Now as a bandsman. And we have women in the band. I play tuba, and I served in 2 bands where I had women tuba players with me too. And you talk about lung capacity, you know, to play tuba. And they're out there, we're marching the Tournament of Roses 5-mile parade, and we're playing the Marines in for 2 miles for the cameras. They're right there with us, they got the lung power to do it. And the women themselves took it up. And so we don't like being evaluated differently because we don't want to be scrutinized that way and looked at like we're getting a pass somehow. And they went, you know, through this whole process saying if we're going to be considered Marines, we should be able to claim it the same as the men. So on their own, they kind of made it an issue. And we don't stand in the way of that because we look at any man who can't do it. So what's the matter with you? You can't do this. You know, women do it. Where are you? So that's an incentive. Yes, sir.
What instrument did you play?
Tuba. I played tuba and electric bass. I had to minor on bass when I was a tuba player. 13 years of that, and then I became a band leader, so I was conducting. But I still get to play every now and then. So, and you know, I've been retired 21 years, and I still miss it every day. Yeah, yeah. But as for the women, milestones. Colonel Margaret Brewer was made the first general, or rather appointed to a general officer's billet as a brigadier, and became the first woman general in the history of the Marine Corps in 1978. Colonel Gail Reels, and Colonel Gail Reels, she led the women's training battalion when I was in the band at Paris Island, so we referred to her as Aunt Gail. Because she would come by the band hall and tell us what a great job we did, so she loved the band, so it was Aunt Gail. But she became the first woman selected by a board of general officers to be advanced to brigadier general. The other one before her was put in the billet. This one was advanced to a board that evaluated her in 1985. Brigadier General Carol Muter assumed command of the 3rd Force Service Support Group on Okinawa, which is a major logistics group that supplies the deploying units that go over to Iraq from that area. She's the first woman to command a fleet Marine force at the flag level. And we say flag level for flag officers, generals, and admirals. So that was the first time we had a female officer involved in the combat roles. How many decades before we had the first enlisted female infantry person? Can't say infantry man. Lieutenant Sarah Deal becomes the first woman Marine selected for the Naval Aviation Training to become a Marine Corps pilot in 1993. General Muter becomes the first woman Major General, getting her 2nd star in the Marine Corps, and she actually, for a time, was the senior woman on active duty in all the armed forces in 1994. Lieutenant General Muter got her 3rd star and was the first woman Marine and the 2nd woman in the history of the armed forces to wear 3 stars in 1996. And Grant was a 3-star at the end of the Civil War. Curious for rankings there. First Lieutenant Vernice Armour became the first female black combat pilot in the Marine Corps, as well as any other service in 2002. Flying, I believe she was flying C-130s. I got that right, the cargo planes. Today, women account for 4.3% of all Marine officers, and women make up 5.1% of the active duty enlisted force. 93% of all op fields and 62% of the positions are open to women. Some things we just like can't for whatever reason, they won't allow them to try out to become recon Marines. Go to recon school, whatever their problem is there. I don't know the politics of that. Women in the Corps serve proudly and capably wherever they are asked to by the Corps and country. And I had some rock solid female Marines with me at Camp Lejeune when I was band leader, that I would depend on them sometimes better than some of the men to do things, because it went by what Marine could do the job than anything else. 1920s, we perfect the air-ground doctrine, we modernize weapons, and now we get to guarding the U.S. mail. There was a rash of robberies in 1920 and 21, and the situation reached the point the Postmaster General requested guns from the War Department for his postal workers. And he wanted to arm all outside postal employees with these pistols. And some of them were shoddy, some of them were broke down remnants of what was used in the Spanish-American War. So it wasn't quite working the way he wanted, but the whole point was to reduce the robberies of the mail. So he said in this effort, postal employees were injured and killed, and some of the robbers slain, but there was a series of robberies and depredations at points which the Postal Service was not quite able to fully equip themselves and defend, and unable to cope, as he put it. So, they lacked the training, experience, and adequate armament, and local newspapers carried accounts of all the mail robberies, lurid details about the deaths and injuries of the postal employees and bystanders. So, President Warren G. Harding in 1921 wrote a letter to Secretary of the Navy, Edwin Denby. You will detail as guards for the United States mails a sufficient number of officers and men of the United States Marine Corps to protect the mails from depredations by robbers and bandits. So we became mail guards. Detailed to ride on mail trucks and trains, because you have the railway post offices, and to guard post offices and other facilities. The mail guard contingent was 53 officers, 2,200 enlisted men. And it's not possible to guard every delivery, but priority was given to substantial shipments of cash boxes or negotiable securities and that sort of thing. So protect the money there. Took their duty pretty seriously. At that time, the Secretary of the Navy, Denby, was a Marine veteran, and he wrote the following no-nonsense instructions to Marines tasked with guarding. He said, "You must, when on guard duty, keep your weapon in hand. If attacked, shoot and shoot to kill." That's right there, right? There's no compromise in this battle with bandits. If two Marines guarding a mail car, for example, are suddenly covered by a robber, neither must hold up his hands, but both must begin shooting at once. Love it. One may be killed, but the other will get the robber and save the mail at all costs. You read that to any Marine, we're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
let's go. We're not even going to play. What do we don't know. We're just saying, one of us gets killed. Like, oh, it's not going to be me because I'm going to be taking this guy down. So it's not a new thing for us at that point, but it solves the problem. It stops the robberies with the Marines being there. So it leads us to World War II. Critical role of the Marines in developing amphibious assault doctrine in the Pacific, taking key islands like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and so many others that we could spend all night talking about the island hopping campaigns. We expanded to 6 divisions and 5 Marine air wings, nearly 87,000 casualties in total, not deployed to Europe, but we did have Marines aboard the ships that were at D-Day, detachments aboard the ships, and providing a lot of the same duties as before, always manning, or rather being ship security, protecting the captain of the ship. If there are boarders to be repelled, the Marines are ready. But now if you have these big turreted guns, one turret on all these big ships would be solely manned by Marines. And you think about like the Iowa-class battleships. It was always the number 3 turret of the 4 that were on those ships at the time. And that was always the Marine turret, that they would handle everything from that. Now, Marine aviation perfects the air-ground doctrine, and even the dogfight role, with the Wildcat, the Hellcat, and the Corsair, like Happy Boyington flew, that's probably the biggest reason why I joined the Marine Corps. Because I saw that show about Black Sheep, and I love the Corsair. And I'd seen Robert Conrad on Wild Wild West when I was younger, but with the Marines and everything else. And then my high school band director challenged me when I said I was good enough to be a symphony musician. He goes, "You ain't good enough for the Marines." I said, "Oh yeah?" So famous last words, and that's what I wind up doing. But Marine aviation goes on, and we perfect this whole air-ground support mission. Like Marines on the island, they see the enemy position, they're radioing, and we don't have artillery support, or even we don't have naval gunfire. We've got Corsairs coming in that can drop bombs and napalm and everything else and put it in the way, so we perfect that as well. Used somewhat in the most well-known island mission, the capture of Iwo Jima. And some of the best-known heroes of the Corps come from this period. Chesty Puller, one of our best-known generals that most people say is the favorite. Pappy Boyington, Manila John Basilone. You have Basilone, Raritan, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Raritan.
And
big statue.
the Quantico Band, we would come up. I don't know which Marine band still does it now, but we lived for that gig because that town treated us like gods. And we'd show up to play for John Basilone. But yeah, incredible. Ira Hayes, a Native American who was a Marine as well. And his Marine brothers were in the famous flag raising in that photo taken by Joe Rosenthal at Iwo Jima. Those 6 Marines are Sergeant Michael Strand, Corporal Harlan Block, Private First Class Franklin Sousley, PFC Harold Keller, PFC Ira Hayes, and PFC Harold Schultz. Strank, Block, and Sousley were killed in action later on in the battle, after the photo was taken. John Bradley is a Navy corpsman who is credited with being one of those Marines, but it's been disputed and confirmed that it was all Marines who were in that famous pose from that photo. There was a previous flag raising done the very same day, and a Navy corpsman was part of that initial pose, but they had a small flag, and the photographer said, if you get a bigger flag, I'll take a better picture. So guess what? They got another flag, and up it went. The first time the flag was put up on Mount Serfass, February 23rd, 1945. And it was Joe Rosenthal who took the famous picture. When I was posted to Okinawa, 1990, there was a battle study that went to Iwo Jima from Okinawa. And the word was put out to all the units in the 3rd Marine Division. 4 Marines from every unit can go on this trip, because we had a C-130 and they packed us in it to go. And you could pick, officer in charge had to pick them. So our band officer on Okinawa is the son of a Marine veteran of Iwo Jima. So he put it out to us and he said, I'll take the 4 best essays from whoever wants to go. And mine was one of the 4 best essays, so I got to go to Iwo Jima, which I'll never get back there again.
Yeah, right.
It was incredible to go. And I brought home sand. I got pictures, put my own little flag on top of Sarabachi and the whole thing up there, yeah. And we stayed on the north end of the island where there used to be a Coast Guard weather station. There's no longer a need for it because we have GPS now, because we had a tower there, the northern tip of Japan at Misawa, and another one in the Aleutians. And there was like this triangulated weather system between Iwo Jima and those other points. And the Coast Guard man, for the longest time, no more. Marines still go, they have things from time to time, but I'm never going back to Okinawa, so I don't have a way to get to Iwo Jima at that point. But what a place, what a thing to go see. Of course, our war memorial in Washington is a statue of that famous flag raising. And on that front of it is Admiral Chester Nimitz' quote. He was the task force commander of the invasion. And he said, among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. And that's what it says in there. Yes? Okay, we'll get there. We'll get through World War II. The Secretary of the Navy was on the flagship and saw it go up, and he said, with that flag raising, the Marine Corps is guaranteed to exist for the next 500 years. Because he was so impressed with it. And that big flag they put up, you could see it for miles, and out of the fleet they all watched it. So we come to Korea, beginning with the formation of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, which sets up the Pusan perimeter, which was a port city in 1950. Most significant contributions are MacArthur's use of the 1st Marine Division landing at Incheon. So we did one of those traditional amphibious landings, came behind the Chinese forces and totally routed. And it was a brilliant move and pushed them back up to the 38th parallel. Intense fighting there for Seoul, and as we came back down, the Marines got trapped at this reservoir by December at the Chosin Reservoir. And an Army unit had been trapped there and pretty much ripped up. They left their wounded behind and left all their vehicles behind. When the 1st Marine Division came in, they put a perimeter around these wounded soldiers to protect them, and 5 Chinese divisions enveloped the 1st Marine Division. And they fought their way out from this winter hellscape that was there, and brought all of the Army wounded and most of their equipment out with them. And reporters who were with them said, so what do you make about this retreat that you're on right now? And the Marine, one of them turned around and said, retreat, hell, we're fighting in another direction. So that's how we get out of saying retreat along the way. Again, air assets are used. The Corsair is still used in that point, even though we have jets at that point. And the Frozen Chosen become this legend among the 1st Marine Division. Now, Lebanon, there was action in Lebanon in 1958 where there was problems with the pro-Western government there. So our president at the time, I believe it was Eisenhower, sent troops and sent Marines in to wave the flag for us, leading up to our involvement then in Vietnam, 1965 to 71, fighting the battle along the DMZ and conducting counterinsurgency with combined action platoons that were integrated with Vietnamese villagers. In Da Nang in 65, large-scale Marine involvement comes about, and by 68, the NVA Tet Offensive, which the Marines were right in the heart of that, and we reached a high end of boots on the ground at that point with our size. We began withdrawing Marines in 69, And by the end of 1971, the Marine Corps was out of Vietnam itself. Longest war in the history of the Marines, and high cost as well of over 13,000 killed and more than 88,000 wounded. In the spring of '75, Marines evacuated embassy staff, American citizens, and refugees in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and Saigon. In May, Marines played an integral role in the rescue of the crew of the SS Mayaguez, captured off the coast of Cambodia. So we're proving ourselves to be available in these small specialty missions as well as the major fights. In the '70s, it's basically a dark time for a lot of the military, as far as how folks are treated when I came home. Our media, some citizens, and many politicians made it kind of unfashionable to serve. And comes back, though, in the early '80s when President Reagan is elected. And I enlisted in '84, I enlisted in '83 and went to boot camp in '84 during his first term. And his re-election was the first election I got to vote in. And I was really concerned because he was talking about we were gonna raise the budget on the military, and that meant pay raises. So as a young Marine, I was really focused on that. But he worked tirelessly to bring the entire, self-esteem of the entirety of the U.S. military back in. And he loved Marines. He said to us at one point, he said, "I've always admired the Marines." He said, most people wake up every day and wonder if they're going to make a difference. Marines don't have that problem, is what he said about us. He came to Paris Island in 1985 to visit. Being in the band there, we were tasked with playing a ceremony for him. 4 years later, I had re-enlisted. I was in the band at Quantico when George Bush was taking over. And the President's Own was busy in Washington for the inaugural parade and all of that. And they had honor platoons at Andrews Air Force Base with a jet waiting for Marine One to bring Reagan in so they could fly him home to California. So the Quantico band was tasked to play with these honor platoons at Andrews Air Force Base. So that was the second time I got to play for Reagan when he was leaving office. In 1991, I'm in the San Diego Marine Band. We didn't go to Free Kuwait. We had to stay at the recruit depot for things. And Reagan was having a big birthday celebration that the El Toro Marine Band would normally play, but they were gone deployed, so we got to play it. And Reagan's out of office. That's the third time I got to play for Reagan. And at that event, we were brought into a room like this, all lined up, and Reagan came in with men with little boxes, little blue boxes, and gave each of us a set of presidential cufflinks.
Oh.
And on the back side, his signatures etched in. So, the Marine Staff NCO dress uniform, beyond the regular blues, we have a short coat that we wear massive chevrons on it called the evening dress. And you can wear cufflinks with that. So I always wore these cufflinks with that uniform from that point on. I'm wrapping up. I'm getting close to the end. We went back to Lebanon, and we just recognized the attack on the Beirut barracks in October of this year, around too. And from that into the rest of Reagan's first term, we went down to Grenada as part of the force that was there, and doing all these things that we perfected over those previous decades and in the previous century about landing and pacifying. We were involved in Operation Just Cause in Panama to get rid of Noriega. Now, I was a tuba player. We are machine gunners by combat duty, even though we're musicians. I was en route to Okinawa, and I got orders during my leave to report to Camp Lejeune as part of an ad hoc battalion that was sent to Panama. And they made a battalion of non-combat MOS Marines for combat. And I was a sergeant, so I was one of the squad leaders. And I had typists, and I had mechanics, and a couple cooks. And they were joking, yeah, we've got a tuba player leading us. We all had to do everything every other Marine was doing. So it was a great way to show that all the Marines get the same kind of training regardless of what we do. So it was an interesting operation there. 1991 was when we liberated Kuwait, you know that, as far as that period. We come up to the global war on terror. The 2nd Marine Division was the first in action in Afghanistan in October of 2003. Or what, no, I'm sorry, it was 2001, we sent units in. And I was band leader of the 2nd Marine Division on 9/11. And the day of the incident, we were doing our quarterly auditions, evaluating our Marines for their ability to play their instruments so we could recommend them for promotion. And our platoon sergeant came into the room where I was in with the band officer and the section leader for the brasses, and he said, hey, we just got a report the Pentagon was hit. And then we just got a report that there was an accident in New York City. So we were turning the radios on, because believe it or not, the Howard Stern show had somebody covering what was going on in New York. And that was the only radio we knew would have somebody that was there that day. And you talk about overzealous lieutenants like that one with John Brown. 10 of my Marines went down the block to the armory. They tried to draw their weapons and their stuff because they thought we were going to get deployed that day. Because we got a call from the Army, said, you got 10 Marines down here want their rep? No, send them back. So, interesting period there as well. I was transferred to 1st Marine Division in December of 2002, and at 1st Marine Division, we did a workup to go to Iraq, and we were part of the security for General Mattis's headquarters when we invaded Kuwait. We were left front quadrant with our machine gun set up. Every time he had to stop, sandbags are up, our machine guns are coming, our 50 calibers and everything else, and he loved the band. Because he said, this bunch they can shoot in two, is how he put it. He loved us that way. So we got to prove ourselves amongst the other Marines there. And our mission's not changed all that much even from then. We're developing better amphibious doctrine and equipment and things like that. We've gone from the Harrier, which was the first vertical takeoff jet. We have the F-35 now, and we're getting rid of the twin rotor helicopter. It looks like a banana. And we've developed this airplane that has rotors this way, and as it takes off, they tilt the nacelles that the propellers are in. It's called an Osprey. And we're developing that in the early 2000s. So those kinds of weapons are used for all these old techniques that we do, but now they're figuring out better ways to deploy them and how to use them up. So I'm trying to wrap this up because they're putting me on the end of it here. I didn't show you the NCO sword, but the NCO sword is the last thing I'll show you. Every good corporal and sergeant can't wait to put on that blood stripe when we get our NCO sword. This is a model 1859 U.S. Army officer sword. And from the Civil War on, Marine non-commissioned officers carry a sword that Army officers carry. Because our officers carry a sword that British field marshals carry. But even the band, the drum major and the band leader, when we do a parade, we'll have it on a belt and we'll wear that for that.
What's the requirements to wear that? Where do you have to?
We have to be a corporal or at least a corporal or a sergeant. Yeah, because it's the non-commissioned officer sword. And it has a really beautiful scroll work, says United States Marines. That birthday ceremony, when the cake is brought out, we cut the cake with the sword as well. And we have to learn at NCO school how you draw the sword and you pull it out and you go to what's called order of arms. And then to salute, it comes up here first and it goes down to here. And that's the equivalent of doing a hand salute. And when they say order arms, you flip it back and you bring it up to your shoulder like that. And we do a lot of time at NCO school practicing not moving your head. Because you get to the point you can do all that too. Some of those habits I heard. But those are my toys
Thank
that I
you
brought
very
along
much.
for you.
Thank you
Sorry
so
we
much.
ran over. But thank you.
Are you going back to Gettysburg?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I have a house inspection tomorrow.
Oh,
One last thing is if you're interested in supporting my efforts being grant, I do a wall calendar every year.
okay.
And the topic of the wall calendar for 2020